The anticipation had been building for months. I'd been counting down the days to see Bad Bunny live, scrolling through fan pages, watching every teaser, and hyping up with my friends. The moment we got our tickets, it was all I could think about. So when the night finally arrived, I should have been bouncing with excitement. But as I entered the arena, something felt wrong. Very wrong. The air was thick, like walking into a dense fog. It pressed against my skin, almost suffocating. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed it, but the crowd was alive with energy. People were laughing, taking selfies, screaming in excitement. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just nerves, but that heavy feeling didn't fade. It only deepened, sinking into my chest like a weight. We found our spots near the stage, surrounded by a sea of people, and for a while, I tried to lose myself in the moment. The lights dimmed, and the arena erupted into cheers. Thousands of voices screamed in unison as the first beats of the music filled the space. Bad Bunny emerged onto the stage, and the noise became deafening. I should have been swept up in it, carried away by the excitement, but the unsettling feeling only grew. And then the vibration started. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable, like a low hum. It crawled through the ground, through my feet, climbing up my legs and burrowing into my bones. I looked down, half expecting to see the floor shaking, but everything appeared normal. No one else seemed to notice. The crowd swayed and danced, lost in the performance, but that hum kept growing, spreading through me, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. Bad Bunny's second song kicked in, and that's when the screens flickered. It was just for a moment, a split second, but in that moment, I saw it. Instead of the usual visuals that accompany the performance, there was a face so twisted and grotesque that my brain struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. Its skin was pale and taut, stretched over sharp, angular bones. The eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to stare directly into my soul. And the mouth, it was wide, impossibly wide, stretching from ear to ear in a grotesque smile that seemed to pulsate with malevolence. I blinked, my heart racing. It was gone. The usual visuals were back on the screen, and the crowd didn't seem to notice. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a glitch, a technical error, but I couldn't shake the image of that face, those hollow, staring eyes that seemed to burn into me. The hum beneath my feet grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from the people around me. I turned, scanning the crowd, and my blood ran cold. Their faces, they weren't right. One by one, people's expressions twisted, contorting into grotesque shapes, their mouths stretched open wider than humanly possible, eyes rolling back into their heads. Their skin seemed to shift, almost as if it were being pulled from the inside. And then they began to scream. But the screams didn't match their movements. Their mouths gaped wide, but the sound that came out wasn't theirs. It was distorted, warped, a guttural howl that didn't belong in this world. I tried to move, but the crowd was too dense. I was trapped, surrounded by bodies that convulsed and writhed as if something was controlling them, using them as puppets. My heart raced, panic flooding through me as I pushed against the sea of people. But no matter where I turned, I was met with the same horrifying sight. More and more people began to collapse, their bodies twitching violently on the ground. Blood oozed from their eyes, their ears, their mouths, pooling beneath them in sickening puddles. And then the face appeared again, on every screen, all around me. The same demonic face with those empty, hollow eyes that burned into me. But this time, it lingered, longer. Its mouth moved, whispering something I couldn't hear, but I felt the words deep inside my chest. The crowd continued to scream, but it was as if their voices were being swallowed by that face, by the darkness that clung to it. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something was gnawing its way inside me. I stumbled, gasping for air, my vision blurring as I tried to stay upright. My legs felt weak, the ground beneath me shifting and shaking. The music, once loud and booming, had become distorted, twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. It was no longer music, it was a roar, a deep guttural growl that reverberated through my body, shaking me to my core. I looked around desperately for my friends, but they were gone. Or maybe they were part of the writhing, screaming mass of bodies that surrounded me. The arena had transformed into a nightmare. The walls seemed to pulse, closing in on us, and the air grew hotter, thicker, until it felt like I was breathing through a wet cloth. The lights above flickered erratically, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to move on their own. I tried to push through the crowd, but every step was a struggle. The ground beneath me felt unstable, like it was shifting, melting. My feet sunk into the floor as if it were turning into quicksand. I looked down, horrified to see the ground had turned black, tar-like, pulling me down with every step. I screamed, trying to pull myself free, but it was no use. The harder I fought, the deeper I sank. The face flashed on the screens again, larger this time, looming over the arena like a twisted god. Its hollow eyes locked onto me, and I felt a surge of terror, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I could hear its voice now, a low, whispering chant that filled my head, drowning out everything else. My chest tightened, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped, sinking into the black, suffocating pit that the arena had become. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was outside the arena, lying on the cold, hard ground. The sky above was dark, and the arena stood silent, looming like a tombstone against the night. The air was still, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing. I sat up, my body aching, my head spinning. What had happened? I tried to piece it together, but the memories were hazy, fragmented. The concert was over, the arena empty, but the hum that had crawled through the crowd, the hum that had twisted everything into a nightmare, it never left. I could still feel it, vibrating in my bones, in my chest. It followed me home, echoing in the silence of my room, growing louder when the lights went out. Weeks passed, but the feeling only grew stronger. Every night, the hum became more insistent, more oppressive, and with it came the dreams, the face. It haunted me, lurking in the corners of my mind, its hollow eyes staring, always staring. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that arena, sinking into the black pit, the walls closing in around me. Now, I don't sleep. I can't. The face waits for me in the dark, whispering in a language I don't understand, but that fills me with an all-consuming dread. The hum grows louder, closer, and I know, deep down, I know, it's coming for me.
The crowd erupted in deafening cheers as Bad Bunny took the stage, but as I stood there, surrounded by thousands of fans, I couldn't shake the unsettling sensation crawling up my spine. I'd brushed off the rumours before, whispers of strange occurrences at his concerts, people blacking out, claiming to see things that couldn't be real, supernatural things. I laughed it off, chalking it up to paranoia or attention-seeking lies. But now, standing in the pulsating sea of people, something felt very, very wrong. As the opening notes of the first song vibrated through the air, a chill ran down my body. The lights, once brilliant and electrifying, began to flicker erratically. It was subtle at first, like the dying breath of an old light bulb, but quickly escalated into violent flashes, casting the arena in a blood-red glow. The air thickened, almost suffocating, as if the atmosphere itself was compressing around me. I strained to hear the music over the roar of the crowd, but something strange hit my ears. Bad Bunny's voice. It wasn't right. Beneath the upbeat tempo, beneath his vocals, there was an undercurrent, a deep, gravelly whisper layered into the song. The sound was almost imperceptible, but it sent icy needles of fear down my spine. The crowd swayed, oblivious, entranced by the performance. But I heard it. I heard that sinister voice, chanting something ancient and malevolent beneath the melody. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone else who noticed. But everyone else danced and screamed, lost in the rhythm. They didn't hear it. How could they not hear it? It was like the walls themselves were vibrating with an evil that I couldn't quite place. I turned back toward the stage, only to find Bad Bunny staring directly into the crowd. His eyes, his once warm and inviting eyes, now cold and empty, like two black voids. Then everything plunged into darkness. The music stopped abruptly, leaving behind a suffocating silence. I blinked, trying to adjust to the sudden blackness, but it was as if the world had been swallowed whole. All around me, nervous whispers began to fill the void. I couldn't see the faces of the people beside me, only the uneasy shifting of bodies, pressing closer together in the dark. And then, the scream. It tore through the arena like a blade, high-pitched and raw, echoing endlessly in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest as the panic spread, the crowd growing restless. When the lights flickered back to life, I gasped. The stage was gone. No platform, no instruments, no lights, just an impossibly vast, gaping hole. It stretched downward into nothingness, an endless black void framed by jagged rocks that gleamed in the low light. Flames licked at the edges, their eerie orange glow casting long, sinister shadows. A foul, putrid smell filled the air, like burnt flesh and decay. From deep within the pit, I heard sounds, inhuman sounds, screams of agony that chilled me to the core, mixed with low, guttural growls that reverberated through the floor. The air buzzed with malevolence, so thick it was hard to breathe. Panic erupted in the crowd. People near the edge began screaming as something invisible seemed to drag them toward the pit. I watched in horror as a man just feet away from me was yanked off his feet, his body flailing as he was pulled into the abyss, his screams growing distant before being abruptly cut off. "No, no!" I screamed, turning to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, glued to the ground. When I looked down, my blood turned to ice. The floor beneath me had split open, cracks snaking outward, and from within those cracks, thick black tendrils snaked upward, wrapping around my ankles. They coiled tighter, pulling me toward the chasm, toward that endless void. I fought against them, thrashing wildly, trying to shake them off, but they only tightened their grip, cold and unyielding, as if alive. The crowd around me devolved into chaos. People screamed as the tendrils reached out for them too, dragging bodies toward the pit. I could hear bones snapping, flesh tearing as some were ripped apart before they even made it to the edge. My chest tightened with terror as I glanced up at the stage, or where the stage used to be. Bad Bunny was still there, standing at the edge of the pit, but he was no longer the man who had entered the arena. His body convulsed violently, his skin peeling back in long, wet strips. His bones twisted unnaturally, bending in ways that no human body could. His face contorted, his mouth widening grotesquely as his skin split, revealing jagged yellowed teeth beneath. His eyes, once cold and empty, now glowed with a malevolent fire, as if something ancient and dark had taken root inside him. He opened his mouth, and from his throat came a sound that no human should ever be able to make, a deep, guttural growl that rattled my bones. He began to sing again, but the lyrics were warped, his voice distorted, demonic. The words were unintelligible, but I could feel their power, their darkness seeping into my mind, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I screamed, pulling desperately at the tendrils, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst. The ground beneath me crumbled further, the pit expanding, swallowing more and more of the arena. Bodies continued to fall, sucked into the abyss, their blood splattering across the floor as they were ripped apart, their screams fading into the depths. I could feel myself slipping, my strength fading as the tendrils dragged me closer to the edge. The pit loomed before me, an endless, yawning maw of darkness, and from within it I could hear them, the voices, screams, not just of pain, but of despair, of souls lost to eternal torment. In a final, desperate act, I tore at the tendrils with everything I had, my fingers bleeding as I clawed at the black vines. I managed to pull one leg free, stumbling backward, away from the chasm. I ran, my heart pounding, but even as I escaped the arena, I knew it wasn't over. The screams followed me, echoing in my mind, inescapable. Now, every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. I see the pit, feel the tendrils tightening around me, hear the demonic growl of something ancient and evil lurking just beneath the surface. The worst part? I know it's not just a memory. It's waiting for me. Each night, the pit grows larger in my nightmares, the tendrils reaching further, pulling me closer to the edge. And one night, I won't wake up.
My friends and I had been counting down the days for weeks, no, months. The anticipation for the Bad Bunny concert was almost unbearable. We had our tickets, our outfits planned, and we made sure to get there early, to snag the perfect spot near the stage. The energy was electric, and as we squeezed into the packed arena, the excitement in the air was contagious. Thousands of people pressed together, waiting, buzzing with anticipation. This was supposed to be the night of our lives, but from the very beginning, something felt off. As the lights dimmed and the first beat of the opening song hit, the crowd exploded into cheers. Bad Bunny took the stage, his presence commanding, and yet, in the middle of the madness, I noticed something unsettling. At first, it was just a flicker, shadows darting across the crowd, faster than any stage light could move. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the shadows kept moving, racing from one end of the arena to the other. They weren't part of the show. And then I noticed the people. Where the shadows passed, they left something behind. A change. The man next to me, who had been dancing only moments before, suddenly froze. His eyes widened, and then, without warning, he began clawing at his arms, hard. His nails tore through his skin, the sound of flesh ripping filling my ears. Blood trickled down his arms, soaking his shirt, but he didn't stop. His fingers dug deeper, scraping bone, his face contorted in pain and fear. But his eyes were hollow, rolling back into his skull. With a final violent shudder, he collapsed to the ground, convulsing in a pool of his own blood. I stumbled backward, horrified, my heart racing. My mouth opened to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I spun around, looking for my friends, but the same thing was happening all around me. More people were scratching, tearing at their own flesh, their bodies writhing on the floor. Screams echoed through the arena, mingling with the pounding music, but it was as if no one could hear them. The panic was suffocating, but what terrified me most was the others, the people who hadn't changed. They kept dancing, oblivious, moving in time with the music, as if nothing was wrong. How could they not see? How could they not feel it? My gaze snapped back to the stage. Bad Bunny was still performing, but his face wasn't right. His smile was too wide, his lips stretching unnaturally, the corners of his mouth curling upward in a grotesque grin. And his eyes were nothing but black voids, bottomless and empty. It felt like he was staring directly at me, like he could see inside my soul, and the longer I looked, the colder I felt. The music distorted, the beat slowing down, twisting into something wrong. It was no longer the catchy, energetic rhythm everyone had come to hear. Instead, it was dark, deep guttural growls that vibrated through the floor, through my body, each note like a sickening pulse that made my stomach churn. The lights flickered, flashing with every beat, and in each strobe of light, I saw something new, something worse. The front of the stage was a massacre. Bodies lay piled atop one another, limbs twisted in unnatural angles, their skin shredded, blood pooled beneath them, soaking into the floor, the metallic stench so thick in the air that it clung to my throat, making it hard to breathe. Something slithered among the bodies, a dark, sinuous shape that moved too quickly for me to focus on. It slid through the carnage, its glowing red eyes fixating on the crowd, leaving a trail of gore in its wake. Every time I blinked, it disappeared, only to reappear closer, moving faster than my mind could process. Then I felt it, a sharp, burning sensation on my arm. I looked down, and my heart nearly stopped. Symbols, strange, ancient runes, were being carved into my skin. The lines appeared as if drawn by an invisible blade, each stroke searing into my flesh, blood bubbling to the surface. I hadn't touched anything, but there they were, deep and jagged. I screamed, desperately trying to scrub them away, but the harder I tried, the more they seemed to burn. My skin felt like it was on fire, the pain unbearable, but the symbols were etched in, immovable, pulsing with a faint red glow. Fear gripped me like a vice. I had to get out. I turned to run, pushing through the crowd, but it was chaos. Some people still danced, completely unaware of the horror unfolding around them, while others were on the ground, twitching, their bodies shredded and torn by unseen forces. Their mouths were open in silent screams, their faces frozen in terror. Blood sprayed into the air as more bodies were pulled apart, limbs flying, torsos ripped open. The crowd surged, a wave of confusion and death, and I was trapped in the middle of it all. I shoved my way through, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the air thick with the stench of blood and death. My arms still burned, the symbols glowing brighter now, casting a faint light in the dark. The music had warped into a nightmarish roar, the bass so deep it felt like the arena itself was shaking. The lights flickered again, and in the brief flashes, I saw the creature. Closer this time, its serpentine body coiled around the stage, its eyes locked onto me. I screamed, my voice lost in the chaos. I had to get out. I had to run. Finally, I broke free, stumbling out of the arena and into the cold night air. My heart was pounding, my skin slick with sweat and blood. The sound of the concert still echoed in my ears, that distorted, guttural music, as if it was following me. I looked down at my arm, and the symbols were still there, carved deep into my flesh, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Weeks have passed, but the marks won't fade. At night, they glow faintly in the dark, casting eerie red light across my bedroom. And sometimes, when everything is silent, I can still hear it. The growl of the music, the screams of the crowd, the whisper of something dark and ancient, waiting just beyond the edge of reality. I know the concert never really ended. It's still happening somewhere, in some twisted, nightmarish version of reality, and the symbols on my arm are a reminder that I'm not safe. None of us are.